Welcome to Tochi Stories. Please don't forget to like, subscribe, and turn on post notification because it will mean the whole world to me. Now let's get right into the story. Brace yourself. The drive from the hospital was quiet, except for the low hum of the engine and the occasional cough from Ebuka in the back seat. Ngozi sat in the passenger seat beside her driver, her hands folded tightly in her lap, eyes fixed on the road ahead. She had imagined this homecoming many times over the past week, but in her daydreams, it had always been warm. The three of them arriving together, sharing a meal, maybe even exchanging apologies. Reality, however, was different. Chike hadn't come to the hospital to help bring his brother home. He had sent a single text, "Let me know when he's discharged." His absence, while not surprising, was like a fresh bruise on a body already sore. When they pulled into the mansion's driveway, Ngozi felt no relief, only a tightening in her chest. She helped Ebuka up the stairs, noticing how much weight he had lost since the accident. The staff greeted her politely, their eyes flicking between her and Ebuka, but the house felt hollow, as though the walls themselves knew peace had not returned. Inside, the changes in routine were immediate and unspoken. The boys' rooms remained the same, but meals were no longer shared in the dining room. The first night back, Ngozi set the table for three, but when dinner was ready, Chike took his plate to his room, without a word. Ebuka ate slowly, barely looking at her, his appetite still affected by the lingering pain from his injuries, and perhaps by guilt he could not yet name aloud. The clink of cutlery against porcelain echoed uncomfortably in the vast space. Afterward, Ngozi cleared the table herself, ignoring the housekeeper's offer to help. She told herself she needed the movement, but the truth was she needed a moment alone, away from the cold distance of her surviving family. Later, she sat in the sitting room with the television on mute, staring at the screen, but seeing only the memory of the crash. The way Ebuka's head had slumped forward, the way dust had swirled in the air, blurring her vision. The silence in the house became its own kind of torment. It was not the calm, restful silence of peace. It was the brittle quiet of tension stretched thin, ready to snap at the slightest provocation. Chike came and went as he pleased, his footsteps quick and dismissive. Ebuka stayed mostly in his room, sometimes venturing into the kitchen for water, always avoiding long conversations. Ngozi tried not to push either of them. She had learned the hard way that love did not always mean chasing someone who was walking away from you. Instead, she let the days pass, focusing on small acts of care, making sure Ebuka's pain medication was taken on time, ensuring the driver knew her schedule so she could avoid unnecessary interactions, and spending evenings in the garden, breathing in the night air. Yet, even as she tried to find her footing, a single truth lingered in her mind. The home she had built was no longer a safe place for her heart. By the end of the first week back, Ngozi had accepted that the trust she once had in her sons, even in Ebuka, who had shown signs of remorse, was fractured. She began making quiet changes to protect herself, moving with the deliberate caution of a woman who had survived a storm and knew another could be brewing. The first change was to the locks. She called in a locksmith she trusted from her church to install high-security bolts on her bedroom and office doors. She didn't announce the change. She simply let it be noticed. The second change was to her finances. She moved the bulk of her lottery winnings into a separate account under stricter banking protocols, one that required her physical presence and identification for any withdrawals. Only a modest amount remained in the household account, enough to run the home, but not enough to tempt anyone into bold theft. She also purchased a small safe for her bedroom wardrobe, one that could be bolted to the wall. Inside, she placed not only jewelry and cash, but also critical documents: her updated will, property deeds, and insurance papers. The new will, drawn up in the weeks after the accident, was a secret she guarded fiercely. It drastically reduced Chike's share and placed Ebuka's portion in a trust he could only access under specific conditions. The bulk of her fortune was earmarked for charitable causes and a few trusted individuals who had stood by her through hardship. She told no one about the specifics, not even Mama Uju, because the fewer people who knew, the safer she felt. It was a strange kind of loneliness, knowing you had to hide the details of your life from the people who should have been your inner circle. Her staff, too, began noticing her change in behavior. She gave instructions in writing more often, kept a mental note of who entered her private spaces, and reduced the number of errands that involved her bank. Chike, if he noticed, said nothing, but his sidelong glances suggested he understood more than he let on. Ebuka noticed as well, though his reaction was different, more hesitant, as if he wanted to ask questions but feared the answers. At night, when the rest of the house slept, Ngozi would sometimes sit at her desk, reviewing her accounts by the light of a small lamp. The blue glow reflected off her face, highlighting both the determination and the sadness etched there. She was not simply guarding her money, she was guarding her life. And though it pained her to think this way about her own children, she knew the truth. In a house where betrayal had already taken root, vigilance was the only path to survival. It started with a phone call, one of those unexpected numbers that makes your stomach tighten before you even answer. Ngozi, Francis's voice came smooth and warm, as though nothing had happened. I heard Ebuka is home. I wanted to see both of you. It's been too long. She almost hung up. Instead, she replied coolly, we're fine. But Francis was not a man easily deterred. That afternoon, his black SUV rolled into the driveway, and he stepped out wearing a deep blue kaftan and a smile that could have fooled anyone who didn't know him. His cologne hit the air before his footsteps reached the door. The staff, trained in courtesy, welcomed him in, but Ngozi stayed seated in the living room, her expression guarded. When he entered, he spread his arms in a gesture that was part greeting, part performance. My dear, he said, you look well. She simply nodded, her hands folded in her lap. Ebuka emerged from his room slowly, leaning against the doorframe. His eyes flicked between his father and mother, unsure of his place in this reunion. Francis approached him first, clapping him on the shoulder, asking about his health, making jokes about being too young to be in hospital beds. Chike appeared soon after, and his reaction was the opposite, a wide grin, a firm handshake, and a warmth that told Ngozi this was not the first time they had seen each other since the accident. They sat together, Francis in the center, the boys flanking him like loyal guards. He asked casual questions at first, how school was going, whether they needed anything, before steering the conversation toward finances. I've been thinking, he said, it's time we made plans for the future. Your mother has done well, but managing this kind of wealth is no small matter. We could make it grow. Ngozi felt the words like the opening moves of a chess game. She didn't answer directly, choosing instead to deflect with polite generalities. The future is in God's hands, she said evenly. Francis's eyes lingered on her, the corners of his mouth twitching, as if he knew she was deflecting. Before he left, he embraced both boys, pressing folded bills into their hands. To Ngozi, he simply said, we'll talk again soon, the promise hanging in the air like a storm cloud on the horizon. After he drove off, she stood at the window, watching the SUV disappear down the street. She didn't need anyone to tell her this was not a social visit. Francis was probing, testing the waters, and if she wasn't careful, he would dive back into their lives with the same ruthless precision as before. In the weeks after Francis's return, Chike's presence in the mansion became more erratic, not because he was absent entirely, but because his loyalty seemed to live elsewhere now. He would leave early in the morning, often before breakfast, dressed sharply in pressed shirts, fitted trousers, and polished shoes Ngozi hadn't bought. When she asked where he was going, his answers were vague, meeting a friend or helping Dad with something. At first, she wanted to believe it was harmless, but her instincts told her otherwise. She had raised him. She knew when he was keeping something from her. The first time she saw him behind the wheel of one of Francis's cars, a sleek black sedan with tinted windows. She stood frozen at the upstairs window, her teacup cooling in her hand. There was something in his posture, the way he gripped the steering wheel, the subtle smile, that told her he felt powerful in that seat, powerful in a way her quiet sacrifices had never made him feel. It wasn't just the cars. Chike began attending events with Francis, networking parties, business meetings, and social gatherings where wealth wasn't just shown but flaunted. He started using phrases Ngozi had heard only from Francis's lips. You have to think like a winner. Money doesn't grow when it sits. Control is the key to respect. When she overheard him on the phone one evening, telling someone, once she loosens her grip, we'll be in a better position, the pit in her stomach grew heavier. He no longer asked her for money. He didn't need to. Francis had found the perfect way to keep him close, feeding him just enough taste of a richer life to make him impatient with his mother's careful, methodical approach. It was subtle, almost invisible unless you knew the boy before all this. The son who once came home sweaty from football games and laughed in the kitchen while eating dinner with his mother and brother. That boy was disappearing, replaced by a young man whose measure of success came in leather seats and applause from strangers. Ngozi didn't confront him, not yet. She knew that a direct attack would push him further toward Francis, who would no doubt frame her as jealous and controlling. Instead, she watched quietly, noting how Francis was shaping him, pulling strings in ways only a manipulator of many years could. She began to realize that Francis's strategy wasn't simply about money. It was about control through influence. Chike wasn't just being given gifts. He was being groomed to see his mother as an obstacle rather than an ally. And while Ngozi told herself she still had one son who might remain by her side, a darker voice whispered that if she didn't act carefully, even Ebuka's loyalty could be pulled into the same orbit. She understood now that Francis's return wasn't a chance for reconciliation. It was the opening move in a battle for her own household. Unlike Chike, Ebuka moved through the days after Francis's return with a quiet heaviness. His injuries from the accident had mostly healed, but the guilt had not. Sometimes Ngozi would catch him staring at her when he thought she wasn't looking, his face a mix of shame and longing to say something he couldn't yet put into words. He didn't try to explain himself. Perhaps he thought there was no explanation that could undo what had been done. Instead, he began helping her in small, almost invisible ways. He would fix a loose hinge without being asked, help carry groceries from the car, or stay in the living room until she went upstairs at night. He didn't speak much during these moments, but his actions seemed to say, I'm still here. Ngozi noticed, and though she didn't verbalize her gratitude, a part of her began to believe that maybe one of her sons could still be reached. Ebuka also began to notice things others might have missed. He saw how Ngozi locked her bedroom now, and how she sometimes kept her office door slightly ajar when speaking on the phone. He noticed the small safe in her wardrobe when he came in to help fix a stuck drawer. He didn't ask about it, partly because he respected her privacy, and partly because he knew that asking would make her think he had an interest in its contents. But those changes told him something important. His mother no longer felt safe in her own home. He thought about the countless times she had worked through the night sewing clothes to pay their fees, the meals she had skipped so they could eat, and the humiliation she endured at the mansion gates when Francis shut her out. He realized that for her to be locking things away now, the danger had to be real and close. Still, Ebuka wasn't ready to confront Chike. He wasn't sure how to bridge the gap between them without igniting open conflict. Chike already looked at him with suspicion, as if he sensed Ebuka might no longer be fully on his side. The last thing Ebuka wanted was to confirm that suspicion too soon. Instead, he chose to watch and wait, the way a hunter studies the movement of prey before making his move. But there was one thing he was certain of. If Francis and Chike pushed too far, if they tried to harm their mother again, physically or financially, he wouldn't stand by this time. He didn't know yet how he would act, but the quiet loyalty building inside him was solidifying into something stronger. For now, he kept his hands busy and his eyes open, preparing for the day he knew was coming. The first time Ngozi saw him again, her body reacted before her mind did. Her hands curled into fists, her breath caught in her throat. It was a sunny afternoon, and she was in the sitting room reviewing receipts when the housekeeper came to say there was a man at the gate asking for her. She stepped to the balcony to look, and there he was, the mechanic who had tampered with her car brakes. He stood with an oily rag hanging from his back pocket, a smirk on his face, leaning casually against the gatepost like he was visiting an old friend. Every muscle in her body tensed. She ordered the security guard to send him away immediately, but he shouted up at her, his voice carrying across the courtyard. "Madam, we need to talk. It's about your sons." Later that evening, she learned from the guard that the man had left a message, not for her, but for Chike and Ebuka. The mechanic claimed to have unfinished business and demanded payment to keep quiet about what happened with the car. The guard, not fully aware of the history, had passed the message to Chike, who took it without expression. Ngozi felt a cold wave wash over her. If the mechanic was bold enough to come to her gate in daylight, then whatever game Francis and Chike were playing had just acquired a dangerous third player. She didn't need to be told that the man's demands would be steep. Men like him didn't settle for crumbs once they'd had a taste of a feast. That night, she heard Chike's raised voice in the courtyard, arguing with someone on the phone. The conversation was short but sharp. Words like deadline and "don't come here again" floated up to her open window. She didn't hear Ebuka's voice, but she suspected he was aware of what was going on. For the rest of the evening, the house felt charged, as if the air itself was waiting for something to snap. Lying in bed, Ngozi understood that this was no longer just a matter of family tension. The mechanic's return meant the danger was not only emotional, but physical and legal. If the truth of the brake tampering came out in the wrong way, it could destroy what was left of her family's name, and perhaps put her in harm's way again. She resolved to keep her guard even higher now, sensing that the next move from Francis and Chike would not be subtle. It was early evening, the kind of golden light that used to make the mansion's gardens look serene, but now it only seemed to throw longer shadows. Chike leaned against the kitchen doorway, his phone in hand, watching Ebuka rinse glasses at the sink. The silence between them had become routine, but that day Chike broke it. "We have a problem," he said flatly. Ebuka didn't look up. "We?" he asked, his tone cautious. Chike stepped inside, his voice lowering. "The mechanic came to me. He's getting impatient. He wants 5 million Nigerian nairas, and he wants it now. If we don't pay him, he says he'll go straight to the police." Ebuka's hands paused in the soapy water, his jaw tightening. He could already feel where this conversation was going. "And you think we should get it for Mum?" Chike nodded, as if it were the most obvious solution. "She has the money. She wouldn't even miss it. Just tell her it's for something else, fees, repairs, whatever. If she thinks it's important, she'll release it." Ebuka turned to face him, his eyes narrowing. "So you want me to lie to her again? After everything?" Chike's expression hardened. "It's not lying, it's protecting ourselves. You think if that man goes to the police, they'll care that you're sorry now? We'll both go down." Ebuka felt the weight of the threat, but also the bitter taste of how easily Chike could speak about dragging their mother into this, without any hint of remorse. "No," Ebuka said finally, shaking his head. "If you're worried about the police, then let's go to them ourselves. Tell them the truth before he does." Chike's face darkened, his voice rising just enough to echo in the tiled kitchen. "And ruin everything? You really are stupid if you think she'll ever forgive you for bringing it all back to light. This is our only way out without losing everything." Ebuka said nothing more, but the air between them grew heavier, their silence now charged with open opposition. That night, Ebuka lay in bed, staring at the ceiling fan as it spun slow, lazy circles above him. Chike's words kept replaying in his mind, but they no longer held the same persuasive power they once had. Instead, he thought about Ngozi, how she had sat beside him in the hospital after the accident, holding his hand even when he couldn't meet her eyes. She had been the one to arrange for his care, to pay the bills without hesitation, even though she must have known he was part of the plan that almost killed her. And here Chike was, suggesting that they bleed her again for the sake of covering their own tracks. No, Ebuka thought. Whatever Chike chose, he was not going to take that path again. He was beginning to realize that protecting his mother might mean standing directly against his own brother. And soon. The invitation came out of nowhere, a call from Francis, his tone as smooth as polished glass. "Ebuka, my boy," he said warmly, "come have dinner with me. Just you and me. We need to talk." Ebuka hesitated, but curiosity, and perhaps a small hope that his father might be different with him, made him agree. That evening, he found himself in a quiet, dimly lit restaurant. The kind of place where the waiters wore gloves and the background music was soft enough to make every word feel confidential. Francis was already seated, a glass of wine in hand, his white kaftan crisp and flawless. "You look better," he said as Ebuka sat down. "Stronger. That's good. A man needs strength to make hard decisions." The conversation started innocently enough, questions about his recovery, his plans for school, but within minutes, Francis shifted to the real reason for the meeting. "Your mother," he began, leaning forward slightly, "is sitting on a fortune, but she's wasting it. Safe investments, charity projects, that's not how you grow wealth. That's how you bury it." Ebuka listened quietly, unsure whether to respond. Francis continued, his voice calm but insistent. "You and Chike could be running things. I've been in business for years. I know opportunities when I see them. But she's holding you back, keeping you dependent. That's not love, Ebuka. That's control." He let the words hang in the air like bait. "You've got to start thinking about your future, about independence. If we work together, I can help you secure a position, start something that will make you your own man." Ebuka's fork rested untouched on his plate. He was old enough now to recognize the shape of manipulation, but it still worked its way under his skin like a splinter. "And what exactly would you want me to do?" he asked cautiously. Francis smiled, slow, deliberate, predatory. "Convince her to trust us with a portion of the money. Just a portion. Enough to turn it into more. I'll handle the rest." For the rest of the meal, Ebuka barely heard the clink of glasses or the soft hum of the restaurant's music. He thought about the so-called control Francis accused his mother of holding. But hadn't she used that control to keep a roof over their heads when Francis himself had walked away? Hadn't she stretched every naira to make sure they went to school, even when she had to humiliate herself begging for fees? When Francis dropped him off at the mansion later that night, Ebuka thanked him politely, but his mind was already made up. He wouldn't be Francis's pawn. If his father thought this was going to be a recruitment, he was wrong. Ebuka was beginning to see the outlines of the real battle, and which side he would be on when it came. The mechanic's deadline came sooner than expected. 3 days after the dinner with Francis, Ebuka walked into the courtyard to find Chike pacing with his phone pressed hard to his ear, his voice sharp. "I told you you'll get it. Just give me more time." The call ended abruptly, and Chike turned to him, his face tense. "He's not playing, Ebuka. He says if he doesn't have the 5 million Nigerian nairas by Friday, he's going to your mother himself." Ebuka didn't flinch. "Then, let him. Maybe she deserves to know everything." Chike's expression shifted from frustration to disbelief. "You've lost your mind. You think she'll just forgive you because you're playing the guilty son now? No, she'll cut us both off." Ebuka's voice was steady. "Maybe I'd rather be cut off than keep stealing from her." The words hung between them, heavy and final. Chike stepped closer, his voice low but venomous. "You're not just choosing her, Ebuka. You're choosing her over me, over your own blood." Ebuka met his gaze without blinking. "You made that choice for me when you decided her life was expendable." Chike's jaw tightened, his eyes narrowing into slits. "Fine. Stay on your high horse. But when this blows up, don't expect me to protect you." The irony stung, the idea that Chike could still talk about protection when it was his schemes that had nearly destroyed them all. Ebuka turned and walked away, his heart pounding, but not from fear. For the first time, he felt clarity. There would be no mending things with Chike as long as Francis had his ear. And if that meant standing against both of them, so be it. That night, the tension in the house was unbearable. Chike stayed out late, returning well past midnight, the smell of alcohol on his clothes. Ebuka sat in his room, his phone in his hand, considering his next step. He thought about going to his mother right then, telling her everything, but he knew timing mattered. If he came to her with accusations and no proof, it could be dismissed as sibling rivalry. No, he needed something solid, something undeniable. For now, all he could do was wait and watch. But the clock was ticking, and with each passing hour, he could feel the final confrontation drawing closer. Somewhere deep down, Ebuka knew that the Real fight was no longer about money. It was about loyalty, about who they would be when the dust finally settled, sons or strangers. It was a humid Wednesday afternoon when Ebuka heard it, the kind of conversation you weren't supposed to hear, but couldn't unhear once it reached your ears. He had gone upstairs to retrieve a spare phone charger from the study, but as he passed by the half-open door of Chike's room, voices floated out, low and urgent. He paused, just enough to catch the deep rumble of Francis's voice. Papers are almost ready. Once we get the medical assessment, the rest is a formality. The court won't even hesitate. Chike laughed lightly, but it was a laugh, without warmth. And after that, Francis's voice took on a tone of smug certainty. After that, she won't have control over a single naira. We'll be the legal custodians of the estate. She can scream all she wants, but the law will be on our side. Ebuka's blood ran cold. He had suspected they were scheming, but this was beyond what he'd imagined. They weren't just after money. They were planning to strip their mother of her autonomy completely. For a moment, Ebuka stood frozen, listening to the sound of papers being shuffled and a pen scratching against the surface. Then Francis spoke again, and the final piece fell into place. The doctor is on our payroll. All we need is for her to show any sign of forgetfulness or confusion, and it'll be in the report. You've got to help push her there. Chike, make her doubt herself. Move things around, hide documents, confuse her schedule. Chike responded casually. That won't be hard. She's already paranoid. Every time she sees me, she hides that little safe in her room like I don't notice. They both laughed, and the sound made Ebuka's stomach twist. He eased away from the door, careful not to make a sound, retreating to his room as quietly as he could. His mind was spinning, not just with the betrayal of their plot, but with the realization that it was happening now, under the same roof, while their mother thought the worst was already behind her. He sat on the edge of his bed, his hands clasped tightly, trying to still their trembling. There was no way he could let this happen, no matter the personal cost. The thought of Ngozi, the same woman who had nursed him back to health after the accident, being manipulated into losing control of everything she'd built was unbearable. Yet, he knew confronting Francis or Chike directly would only drive them to move faster. He needed to play this carefully. That night he barely slept, replaying every word he'd overheard, already forming a plan. By morning, one truth had crystallized in his mind. His loyalty could no longer be divided. He had to pick a side, and the side he was picking would make him an enemy in his own family. The decision weighed on him all morning, but by noon, Ebuka knew he couldn't put it off. He found his mother in the small upstairs lounge, sitting in her favorite armchair, reading with a cup of tea by her side. Her face softened when she saw him, something he hadn't been used to since before the accident. "You look troubled," she said, setting her book aside. He sat opposite her, his heart pounding. "Mum, there's something I have to tell you, and you're not going to like it." Her brows knitted, but she gestured for him to go on. He started from the beginning, his voice low but steady, recounting every detail of what he had overheard. The forged medical assessment, the plan to move her things, the bribed doctor, the legal papers. At first, she just stared at him, the tea cooling beside her untouched. By the time he finished, she was gripping the arm of her chair, her knuckles white. "They're planning to have me declared mentally unfit," she repeated, the disbelief in her voice barely masking the simmering fury beneath it. Ebuka nodded. "They've already started. Chike will probably try to make you doubt yourself." Francis said as much. "They want control of everything. Mum, they're not going to stop." She sat back slowly, her eyes narrowing in thought. For a long moment, she didn't speak, and Ebuka wondered if she was weighing whether to believe him. But then she sighed, long and deep. "I should have known Francis wouldn't give up so easily. And Chike," she trailed off, shaking her head. "I've been foolish to think blood alone was enough to keep this family together." When she looked at him again, her gaze was sharp. "Why are you telling me this now? You could have gone along with them and gained from it." Ebuka's reply was quiet but firm. "Because I'm done hurting you. Whatever happens, I want to be on the right side of this." Her eyes softened, and for the first time in months, there was no wall between them. Then we'll fight this together, she said finally. Ebuka felt an unexpected weight lift from his chest at those words. She didn't accuse him, didn't remind him of his past mistakes. She simply accepted his loyalty in the present. In that moment, something shifted between them. The fracture that had been widening for years began, however slightly, to heal. You'll have to be careful, she warned. If they suspect you're against them, they'll cut you out entirely. He nodded. I know, but I'm not afraid of them anymore. The days that followed were like living in a house with two parallel worlds. In one, Francis and Chike continued their quiet plotting, confident in their scheme. In the other, Ngozi and Ebuka moved with deliberate secrecy, speaking in low voices behind closed doors, exchanging brief nods that meant far more than they said aloud. Ngozi quietly instructed the head of her private security to take orders from Ebuka without question, a move that surprised even him. If you're going to help me protect what's mine, you'll need access to the people who can act fast, she explained. He began reviewing household staff schedules, noting who might be loyal to Francis and who could be trusted. In the evenings, while Chike was out, Ngozi opened her safe and showed Ebuka the documents they needed to guard, bank statements, property deeds, and the original copy of her will. These are the targets, she said, her tone matter-of-fact. Without these, they can't move forward legally. Ebuka spent hours quietly gathering what he could without arousing suspicion. He started leaving his phone recording in strategic places, under the sofa in the main lounge, on top of the bookshelf in the study, capturing snippets of conversation between Chike and their father. Some were mundane, but others were exactly the kind of proof they would need later. Discussions about how long until the doctor's report, and whether Ngozi was already showing signs of confusion. The more evidence they gathered, the more Ebuka began to understand just how deep the betrayal went. It wasn't only about money. It was about erasing their mother's authority, reducing her to a figurehead while they controlled everything. Late one evening, as they sat in the lounge reviewing the audio clips, Ngozi looked at her son with quiet pride. You know, I didn't expect this from you, she admitted. After everything, I thought you'd already chosen your father's path. Ebuka met her gaze. I almost did, he confessed. But then I realized something. The only person who has ever stood for me when I was at my worst is you. I'm not going to let them take that away. She reached out and placed her hand over his. Then let's finish this. And when it's over, they'll know exactly what it means to betray the wrong people. It was the first time in a long while that Ebuka allowed himself to believe they could win, not just survive, but take back control entirely. The next week turned into a quiet, calculated hunt for evidence. Ebuka knew they couldn't just expose Francis and Chike on suspicion alone. They needed undeniable proof, the kind that would hold in court and shatter their schemes in one blow. Every day, he positioned himself in rooms where they tended to meet, setting his phone to record, leaving it casually on a side table or among the decorative vases so it wouldn't raise suspicion. He also began discreetly using the mansion's security cameras to his advantage. Most people thought the cameras were only monitored for break-ins, but Ngozi had a private feed in her study. Together, they went through hours of footage, isolating moments when Francis handed Chike envelopes, when the mechanic was ushered through the back entrance, when documents were exchanged. Slowly, their collection grew, audio files, video clips, photographs of the forged medical report with the fake doctor's stamp. One afternoon, Ebuka followed Chike into the garage, pretending he was there to check the generator. Chike was speaking in low tones to the mechanic, who leaned casually against a silver SUV. Ebuka crouched behind a workbench, holding his phone low to the ground so the microphone could pick up their words. She's getting too comfortable, the mechanic muttered. You need to push her harder. Misplace something valuable. Her jewelry, maybe, so she starts panicking. That'll make the doctor's report more believable. Chike chuckled. Already done. Last week, I moved her safe keys and acted like I didn't know where they were. She was tearing the room apart. That snippet alone was enough to confirm their tactics were deliberate psychological manipulation. Ebuka didn't confront them. Instead, he slipped out, his heart pounding, knowing this was exactly the kind of detail that could destroy their legal argument. By the end of the week, They had a folder thick enough to make even a stubborn police officer take notice. Ngozi printed transcripts of the audio recordings and paired them with still images from the camera footage. If we play this right, she told Ebuka, they won't see it coming. And once they realize the police are already here, it will be too late for them to destroy anything. Ebuka nodded, but kept his thoughts to himself. Deep down, he knew the most dangerous part was still ahead. They would have to get Francis, Chike, and the mechanic in one place, without giving them any reason to suspect a trap. That would mean lying convincingly to people who would destroy them without hesitation. It was a dangerous gamble, but it was also the only way to end this war once and for all. Ngozi and Ebuka crafted their plan with precision, understanding that if any step went wrong, the entire operation could collapse. The first move came from Ngozi herself, a phone call to Francis, her voice warm and disarmingly polite. She told him she'd been thinking about the future and wanted to have a family discussion about her estate, particularly about the possibility of letting Chike take over some of the business responsibilities. Francis, naturally, took the bait. He offered to bring Chike over that Saturday, so we can finalize things. Ngozi hesitated just enough to make it sound like she was reluctantly agreeing, then added, "You can also bring that friend of yours, the mechanic, if you think he should be involved in the security of my assets." Francis chuckled, thinking she was finally bending. "Good," he said. "You won't regret this." The second part of the plan involved setting the stage. Ebuka arranged for the meeting to be held in the main lounge, a wide, open space with no easy exit except through the double doors at the front. Behind the scenes, he coordinated with 2 plainclothes police officers and 3 of Ngozi's most trusted security guards. The officers would wait in the adjoining dining room, listening to the conversation in real time via a hidden earpiece connected to Ebuka's phone. Once the incriminating statements came, they would quietly enter and make the arrests. Everything, from the positioning of the chairs to the placement of the recording devices, was thought through to the last detail. On the night before the meeting, Ngozi sat across from Ebuka in her study, her expression a mixture of determination and sadness. "You know," she said softly, "when I first came back from the hospital, I thought I had lost both my sons. Chike seemed too far gone, and you were still trying to figure out where you stood. Now it's just you and me." Ebuka didn't shy away from her gaze. "I can't promise I'll undo the past," he said, "but I can promise you I won't stand on the wrong side again." She reached over and squeezed his hand. "That's all I need." In that moment, they weren't just preparing for a trap. They were cementing the alliance that would carry them through the storm about to hit. Saturday arrived, heavy with the kind of tension you could taste in the air. The morning passed slowly, each tick of the clock a reminder that the plan had to be flawless. By 3 in the afternoon, the lounge was set, the armchairs angled just enough to face each other, a coffee table in between with tea and snacks, and the double doors standing open to make the space seem inviting. Ebuka lingered in the hallway, phone in his pocket recording, earpiece in place. When Francis's SUV pulled into the driveway, he felt his pulse quicken. Chike stepped out first, grinning as though he'd already won. Francis followed, his swagger unmistakable, and behind them came the mechanic, his expression cautious but curious. They exchanged polite greetings, the kind that mask layers of hostility beneath a thin veneer of civility. Ngozi welcomed them with the grace of a woman who had played this game before. "Please, sit," she said, gesturing to the chairs. They settled in, and for the first few minutes, the conversation was almost painfully normal. Talk of business, of property values, of making sure the family stays strong. Then Francis leaned forward. "So, Ngozi, have you given any thought to my proposal?" She tilted her head. "Which proposal is that?" His smile widened. "The one where you let us manage the estate. For your peace of mind. You know, in case you're not always in the best state to make these big decisions." Chike added smoothly, "It's what's best for everyone." That was the moment Ebuka had been waiting for. He leaned forward, feigning agreement, and asked just the right question. "And how exactly would that work? Wouldn't you need proof of her condition?" Francis didn't hesitate. "Already sorted," he said with a sly grin. "The doctor's report is ready. thanks to Chike. All that's left is the paperwork. The mechanic snorted. Told you she'd come around once she realized we could make her life easier. That was it, the incriminating line. Ebuka gave the faintest nod toward the dining room. Moments later, the double doors at the far end of the lounge began to close, not by the hands of family, but by the quiet, deliberate movement of the security guards stepping into place. The air in the room shifted, the trap was sprung, and for the first time, Francis's confident smile began to falter. The silence in the room thickened as the double doors shut, the sound echoing like a final judgment. Francis shifted in his seat, his eyes darting from the guards to Ngozi, trying to mask his sudden unease with a scoff. "What's this about?" he asked, forcing a laugh that sounded more like a growl. Ngozi didn't answer immediately. She let the question hang in the air, the tension suffocating. Then she turned to Ebuka, her voice calm but steady. "Do you want to do the honors?" Ebuka pulled out his phone and placed it gently on the coffee table. With a tap, the first recording played. Francis's own voice, casual yet damning, discussing the forged medical report and their plan to have Ngozi declared unfit. Chike's laughter followed, then the mechanic's smug suggestions. The sound of their own words filled the room like a poison they could no longer control. Chike's face paled, his earlier smirk gone. "This is taken out of context," he stammered, leaning forward as if he could physically push the truth away. Francis's jaw tightened, his eyes narrowing on Ebuka. "You've been spying on us," he demanded. But the accusation lacked power. It was the cry of a man who knew he'd already lost the upper hand. Ebuka didn't flinch. "I've been protecting my mother," he replied. "Something you should have done instead of plotting to destroy her." His voice was steady, each word carrying the weight of a son's final loyalty. The mechanic, however, seemed less rattled by the moral implications and more concerned with survival. He began glancing toward the windows, calculating whether a sudden dash could save him. But the guards already in place had subtly shifted to block every possible exit. Ngozi leaned forward then, her tone sharp but without rage, like a woman who had been preparing for this day long before they even imagined crossing her. "You thought I was weak. You thought I'd break and beg you to help me. But the truth is I was waiting for you to show your full hand so I could take it all from you in one move." She gestured toward the doors, and in stepped two uniformed officers, their expressions unreadable, but their presence undeniable. One of them spoke calmly, reading out the charges: conspiracy to commit fraud, forgery, attempted coercion, and suspicion of involvement in the earlier break sabotage. The sound of the words seemed to drain the last of Francis's confidence. For the first time, he looked not like a predator, but a cornered animal, and the walls were closing in. Francis shot to his feet, his voice raised in a mix of outrage and desperation. "You can't do this. We're family. You think the police will believe her over me." But the officer didn't falter. The evidence had already been forwarded ahead of time, courtesy of Ebuka's careful planning. "We don't need to believe her," the officer replied evenly. "We believe the recordings, the documents, and the video footage showing you conspiring with the mechanic to manipulate her mental health records." Chike's mouth opened as if to protest, but the second officer was already moving toward him with handcuffs. His gaze flicked to Ebuka, a twisted mix of betrayal and disbelief. "You'd really do this to your own brother?" he asked, his voice trembling more from wounded pride than fear. Ebuka's response was quiet but cutting. "I didn't do this to my brother. I did this to a man who stopped being my brother when he decided our mother's death would be more profitable than her life." The mechanic, perhaps sensing that arguing would only worsen his fate, attempted to strike a bargain on the spot. "Look, I was just following orders," he said, turning toward Ngozi. "If you let me go, I'll tell you everything, dates, payments, even the other people Francis has worked with." Ngozi didn't even grant him the courtesy of a response. It was Ebuka who spoke, his tone almost pitying. "Too late. You had your chance to tell the truth before you took the money and put my mother's life at risk." The officers didn't wait for more excuses. In practiced efficiency, they secured each man, reading their rights as the guard stepped back to allow the arrest to proceed. The once proud trio was now reduced to murmurs and curses, their wrists bound. their future shrinking by the second. As the officers escorted them out, the air in the lounge felt different, lighter, cleaner, as though a long-standing shadow had finally been lifted. Ngozi sat back, her hands folded in her lap, watching them go, without a trace of gloating. Ebuka remained standing, his posture tense until the last of the convoy had left the driveway. Only then did he exhale, the weight of months of secrecy and danger sliding off his shoulders. For the first time since the ordeal began, they could breathe without looking over it. But they both knew the real victory wasn't in the arrests alone. It was in the quiet assurance that they had taken back control of their lives, together. And in that silence, there was a bond no conspiracy could ever break again. The house felt unnervingly quiet after the arrests. For months, it had been a place of whispered plotting, sharp exchanges, and the invisible weight of unspoken mistrust. Now only the steady hum of the ceiling fan and the occasional creak of the floorboards remained. Ngozi sat at the long dining table with a cup of tea, the afternoon sun spilling through the windows, casting gold across her skin. Ebuka joined her, sliding into the seat beside her without a word. For a while, they simply sat in silence, letting the stillness soak into their bones. It wasn't the awkward quiet of a estranged family. It was the peace that comes after surviving a storm. When Ngozi finally spoke, her voice was low, reflective. "I thought I'd never feel safe in this house again," she admitted. "But you've given me back something I didn't even realize I'd lost, my trust in my own blood." Ebuka looked down at his hands, tracing the edge of his cup with his finger. "I just did what I should have done from the start," he said. "I chose the right side." But Ngozi shook her head gently. "No. You chose the harder side. The side that would cost you your brother. The side that meant walking away from promises of easy money and influence. That takes more than just doing what's right. It takes strength." Her words sank deep, though Ebuka didn't reply. Instead, he let his mind wander to all the nights he had doubted himself, wondering if he was making a mistake siding with her. Now, watching her sit there in quiet strength, he knew without question that he had made the only choice worth making. The rest of the day passed slowly, each hour feeling like a step toward reclaiming normalcy. The staff, once cautious in their movements, began moving more freely, their voices lighter, the tension gone from their shoulders. By evening, Ngozi and Ebuka were in the garden, watching the sunset from the stone bench beneath the jacaranda tree. "This is how it should be," Ngozi murmured. "No plotting. No looking over our shoulders. Just family." Ebuka turned to her, a small smile playing at his lips. "And no more pretending." She nodded, her gaze lingering on the horizon. The war was over, at least this battle was, and in its place was a fragile but genuine peace. One they both intended to guard with everything they had left. The morning after the arrests, the mansion felt like a place reborn. The tension that had clung to its walls for months had lifted, replaced with a quiet dignity that Ngozi intended to preserve. She sat at her mahogany desk in the study, a pen poised over a crisp sheet of paper. Before her lay her revised will, the final safeguard against any future betrayal. The legal advisor, a gray-haired man who had served her for over 2 decades, waited patiently across from her, his spectacles perched low on his nose. "You're certain about this distribution?" he asked, glancing over the document. Ngozi's eyes didn't waver. "More certain than I've been about anything in years," she replied. "Ebuka stood when others plotted my fall. He chose my life over his comfort. That is worth more than gold." Her tone was steady, not fueled by vengeance, but by a deliberate choice to reward loyalty. She detailed her intentions clearly. Over half of her wealth would go directly to Ebuka, unencumbered and with full control. The remaining portion would be placed into a trust one Ebuka would manage, with strict instructions for it to fund educational scholarships, community projects, and housing for widows and single mothers. "If my sons had been taught better values," Ngozi said, her voice quiet but firm, "perhaps they wouldn't have tried to destroy me for money. Maybe I can give others a better chance than I gave them." The lawyer made the necessary notes, ensuring every clause was airtight. Ngozi had learned that in matters of inheritance, the devil was in the details, and she had no intention of leaving loopholes for greedy hands to exploit again. By the time the signing was complete, a sense of finality settled over her. It wasn't just about money. It was about cementing the truth of who had truly stood beside her when the storm came. Ebuka entered the study just as the lawyer was packing his briefcase. "What's going on?" he asked. Ngozi smiled faintly. "Just making sure the right person holds the keys to this house, and to my legacy." Ebuka's brow furrowed, but she offered no further explanation, only placing her hand over his. "You'll understand when the time comes." In her heart, she knew that moment wouldn't be far away. The day was warm, the air heavy with the scent of blooming hibiscus, as Ngozi and Ebuka stood outside the tall black gates of the mansion. It had been a week since Francis, Chike, and the mechanic had been taken away. News of their arrest had spread quickly, though Ngozi kept her public comments brief, declining interviews and allowing the courts to handle the noise. Today was different. Today wasn't about police reports or legal victories. It was about reclaiming the home not just as a structure, but as the safe place it had once been. Ngozi paused before stepping through the gates, glancing at her son. "You're sure you're ready for this?" she asked. Ebuka nodded without hesitation. "I was ready the day I decided to stand with you." They walked side by side along the driveway, their steps in sync. For a brief moment, Ngozi remembered the day she had first moved into this house with her late husband, how she had imagined raising their sons here in peace. That dream had been fractured by greed, but today it felt like she was building something new from the ashes. The staff greeted them warmly, their relief visible. One of the older gardeners even paused his work to say, "Welcome home, madam. Welcome home, young master." The words, simple as they were, carried a weight that made Ngozi's chest tighten. For the first time in months, the phrase home didn't feel like a lie. As they reached the wide steps leading into the mansion, Ngozi stopped and turned to Ebuka. The sunlight filtered through the trees, casting golden light on his face. "You gave me back more than money, Ebuka," she said softly. "You gave me back my life." Her voice trembled slightly, but it was with gratitude, not weakness. Ebuka didn't respond with words. Instead, he took her hand and led her up the steps. Together, they stepped inside, the heavy doors closing behind them with a solid, reassuring thud. It wasn't the end of their journey, but it was the beginning of a new chapter where loyalty had triumphed and trust had found its place again. And for Ngozi, that was a wealth far greater than any fortune she could count. Thank you for watching this video. What did you learn from this story? Drop it in the comments. Please make sure you like, comment, and subscribe to my YouTube channel Tochi Stories for more.